So I am back inside today, and I wanted us to talk about wealth in Kenya and wealth in America. And I wanted us to compare the two. Now, if you guys have been watching my videos, you probably know Jimmy is a numbers guy. I like to dive into the numbers and weeds of things because while there's always perceptions, there's also reality. And I believe that the numbers gives you the realities. The statistics gives you the meat, the real raw, the truth, and all that. Now, when we're talking about perception of wealth around the world, if somebody was you were to ask a random person how they view Africa, specifically Kenya, there's a general perception of Africa being a poor continent, the dark continent. So they would probably throw Kenya within that same label. And when they look at America, America sells the American dream. That's where the perception of America comes from. That American dream that gets sold and put into media and everything. And that dream is that you could come here, pull yourself, start from zero, and pull yourself up by your bootstraps to create something. Like create something tangible and move forward in life, which is true. But like I said, there's always numbers and there's always statistics, which gives you the reality of how that looks and what it takes to actually attain that. So the first topic I wanted us to dive into is where wealth in both of these countries lie. And I believe that this is important to understand and talk about because it gives you a better understanding of what's it called? Like what happens when people fall on hardship and how often people lose wealth, where wealth is concentrated, all that stuff. So, as usual, I usually ask Google and my friend ChatGPT. Google gives you just straight numbers, but I don't want to blab numbers at you. Chat gives you more of like a conversational type of answer. And when I asked my friend Chat today, where does wealth in America lie? There was four key places, and I asked the same question for Kenya. So, number one in America is primary residence. Number one in Kenya is land and real estate. Important to understand these two things. Number two in America is retirement accounts. And number two in Kenya is agriculture. I'm going to go up to number four for both of them, and then I'm going to break them down as to how that affects people. Number three in America is financial assets. And then number three in Kenya is business ownership. Number four in the US is business, while number four in Kenya is financial assets. So pretty much three and four flip for the US and Kenya. And then number two in Kenya is agriculture, while number two in America is retirement accounts. Now, let's go back to number one, primary residence being your main basket for where your wealth lies here in America. If you've been watching the news for years now, you know that America goes through ups and downs all the time. And a lot of people's wealth being concentrated in their home usually means that whenever we have these stock market crashes and these housing bubbles that pop and come every 5, 10 years, people get wiped out. People's life savings goes completely gone. People go from working 30 years to now seeing their retirement account and telling themselves like I only can survive on this for 6 years. Meanwhile, in Kenya, when you look at the primary store of wealth being land, land usually doesn't drop in value that fast. With a growing population, a growing world, an urbanizing country, Kenya, land is seen as a more secure investment. And usually, if somebody's not buying it directly as an investment, most families' wealth will be tied to their farm or something. And that's something a lot of people always forget to understand. Like when I look at my American friends here and their family structures and everything, and I look at my family back in Kenya, I always ask myself, like, okay, when my friends' grandparents die, they're gonna pass down a home that's probably paid off, right? Now, usually that home within one generation is either gonna be used, sold, but that money usually doesn't get passed on for many generations. Like that, it's gonna be gone pretty quick, right? Now, it depends on obviously how you manage that money. If you're smart with it, you can grow it and pass it on to your family. But the reality of what usually happens is that you'll sell your grandparents' home, or your parents will sell their parents' home, use that money to either help you get on your feet as a up and coming youth or something, or they'll use that money to get themselves out of debt or whatever. Meanwhile, in Kenya, when I look at what my grandparents have, it's their estate. They have their house, and they have quite some land with what's it called? That's farmable. So when I think about the concept of like people in Kenya, obviously leave like everyone comes from a village. I spend a lot of time online and I look at like Google Maps all the time when I'm trying to understand like where I should buy land and all this stuff. And one thing I love doing on Google Earth is you get this measurement tool and you can actually measure how big people's tracts of lands are. Now, the average size of land that I'll see whenever I'm online on Google, like you'll see a random family compound, and I'll usually do the lines. On average, I see like 1 to 2 acres. That's not the case here in America. Most families don't have 1 to 2 acres somewhere sitting down, right? And when I think about the idea of like, okay, my parents, my father came from the village, like most people's fathers do. Most people in Kenya have a place that they go back to during Christmas and all that. You go visit your grandparents, and that's your ushago, whatever you want to call it. It's like back home, and usually that does not get sold. That does not leave the family most of the time. Like when I think about my grandparents passing away, once my last grandparent is gone, I don't think that my family is going to get rid of that property. And that property already has what's it called? Land that's sectioned off where it's farmable. And this is the case for most Kenyans. Now, obviously, there's Kenyans who don't have a place to go back to. Their family doesn't have lands out somewhere. But I would argue that the majority of Kenyans do. And when I think about somebody like my father who left the village, went to the city to create a better life for himself, let's say everything for him was to fail or whatever, or he wasn't able to establish himself. Most of the time, you go back to your village. You go back to your village and you have a place to stay. You have a place you could always go back to, right? If you don't have a job and you're not employed, guess what? Hit the farm, start plowing, start planting, start doing something. But when I think about here in America, the homeless population here is so high because the reality is that a lot of people, it's like once you're so out of luck, once you fall on your feet or fall off your feet, there's not really much to go back to. Like let's say you do move back in with your parents or you do move back in with your grandma. You don't have a piece of land that you could go farm and create something. Reality is I could go move in with my grandma today and feed myself off of her farm. I'm not saying we're sitting on some like 20, 50 acres tract of land. No, it's probably like 1 to 2 acres at most. But that's a big difference that a lot of people don't understand. Now, number two in Kenya was agriculture. And number two in the US was retirement accounts, 401ks and stuff. Like I said earlier, land doesn't drop in value as fast as your home does, especially here in the US. We go through housing bubbles all the time. The price of land in my grandma's place and the price of land where my father owns land near Nairobi, it's been climbing for years. It's not gonna drop. It's not gonna come back down too far. But what I've seen in the US is that people get wiped out all the time. Now, when you hear retirement accounts like 401ks, Roth IRAs, and all that stuff is tied to the stock market. So, like I said earlier, we have housing bubbles and we also have stock market bubbles and crashes. It's happened multiple times in my life. I'm 26 and I've seen the 2008 crash. I've seen what's it called, the housing bubble pop and all that. And I've seen the stock market go up and down over the years and big dips, big rises, big pops and everything. So when I want to compare that second part, retirement accounts to agriculture. Like I said before, most Kenyans have some family land somewhere rural, and usually a section of that land is set aside for farming, self-sustainability. Majority of Kenyans come from a farming background, and that's the biggest industry in Kenya. So agriculture being our second store of wealth, because our economy is heavily dependent on agriculture. Even here it says many wealthy families, particularly in rural areas, derive their wealth from large scale farming and agribusiness. Now, it doesn't even have to be large scale. If you're in the rural part of Kenya, majority of your income comes from agriculture. Agriculture doesn't crash like the stock market and 401ks, right? So while one crash can wipe out number one and number two here in America, your home wealth, and two, your 401k, a stock market crash in Kenya, right? You still have your land. The population is still growing, right? Your land is not gonna be devalued just overnight like that. Now, obviously, let's say some crazy thing happens, your area becomes very unsafe. The violence is up. There's instability. Obviously, land would be less in such an area, but that's not the case. Most places are well protected, and your land is gonna hold its value. And agriculture, people are gonna always need to eat. At the end of the day, a potato can always feed someone. Okay, so yes, you can grow the wrong crop, and it may not have a market, and your goods can spoil, but that crop still has a value at the end of the day. Your 401k, straight in the drain. Let's go on to number three: financial assets, stock market, bonds, and mutual funds. That's number three in America. Number three in Kenya is business ownership, which is interesting to me. Remember, I said number three and number four flip for Kenya and the US. So while number three in the US is what's it called? Financial assets, number three in Kenya is business. And then number four in the US is business, while four in Kenya is financial assets. So the difference is that like all of all of Kenya's top three are hard things. Usually, your land, your agriculture, and a business usually have assets to a business. Let's say you run a transport business. You own some cars. You own a truck. Let's say you have a business where you rent out equipment or something. You own that. You have a small shop, right? You have goods in that shop. If your business, like let's say the area loses a lot of people and you're not getting as much business, you can still sell off those assets that you have and get something back. Meanwhile, like I said, in America, number three is still financial assets, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. All that stuff is still tied to the American economy, the stock market, and everything. Like I said before, when that drops, your wealth goes with it. Your individual business, right? It's dependent on you. You do the maths. You make sure your business is what's it called financially stable and financially feasible in the area you set up in. So let's go on to number four. Number four, like I said, in the US, that's where business comes in. And the reason that's number four is because most people in the US can't start a business. It takes so much to start up a business here. And I think if I'm correct, the statistic in the US is that 50 something percent of businesses fail within the first year. When you think of business in Kenya, most people are starting small scale businesses, right? They're not going to take large loans. Most banks aren't giving you what's it called? A large sum of capital that can get you in debt and make you go bankrupt. Most of the time, you'll get a small loan, but at the end of the day, what's it called? Business being number four in America tells you that it's the most out of reach for the majority of Americans. Meanwhile, number four in Kenya is financial assets. So while America's like top three are tied to things in the overall economy that affect you, Kenya's top three are tied to hard assets. Land. What was number two? I'm over here losing my train of thought. There's land, there's agriculture, and then there's business. And then number four, finally in Kenya, you get to financial assets. So I view that as a cultural thing. Culturally, we view the hard, tangible assets as more reliable. That's our go-tos. Like last resort is when you go to buy a stock or a bond. Now, that's not a common thing in Kenya. The stock market here, you go get a regular job in your 401k, you're already in the stock market. You don't have to go and open a trading account and buy an individual stock. No, that stuff gets tied to your 401k and all that stuff. In Kenya, that's number four. But usually that manifests in the form of SACCOs or unit trust, stock market, and then government bonds. So that's a last resort for most Kenyans. So that's the first segment of this talk. We're talking about wealth, and I explained to you guys the top four places where wealth lies in the U.S. and in Kenya, and the reason that one may be better than the other. Now, let's move on to the next segment. Okay, so part two of this conversation, wealth distribution. Um, I'm gonna start off by saying wealth inequality in the U.S. is higher than in Kenya. When you're talking about wealth distribution, we're talking about of the country's total wealth, what percentage of people control each percentage of the wealth. In the US, the top 10% are controlling 70% of the country's wealth. In Kenya, the top 10% only control 40%. Now, the bottom 50 in the US are controlling only 2.5% of the total country's wealth. Meanwhile, in Kenya, the bottom 50 control, if I'm correct, less than 1%. Now, the reason wealth distribution is important is because when you understand how money circulates and how money operates, money usually moves between classes. Like the same class of people are usually doing business with each other and able to interact with each other. So, for example, the family in the US that can afford $1 million home, and that $1 million home may rise in value by $100,000, $200,000, right? Most likely they're selling that home to another family that's in the same class that can afford $1 million homes. Doctors selling to doctors and lawyers, right? In Kenya, it may be a different picture where majority of the wealth is lying in, let's say, the business class, and what will happen is this business owner is most likely doing business with another business owner. And when you understand how wealth usually sits at the top, even within businesses, any profits that are made between those people at the top, the owners of the business, the top 10 percenters. Yes, you may have a big chunk of Kenyans earning menial labor wages and stuff, but the majority of the wealth is still going to circulate between that business class. And in the US, the same thing. Now, to understand this in layman's terms, make it simple for you guys. Let's assume that, what's it called? America had 100 people. America was worth $100. 10 people are controlling 70. In Kenya, 10 people are only controlling $40 of the total country's wealth. That lets you know how unequal America is compared to Kenya. Now, like I said before, you can look at both countries and say that, but the poor in Kenya are extremely poor. And I'll tell you, you're correct. But it's about the actual total wealth and who's in control of it. You may have the extremes in Kenya who are extremely rich, and that usually falls into the class of people like ex-politicians. You have the Uhuru family, you have the Moi family, all those people who were in politics and acquired shady wealth. They're usually the top one percenters. In the U.S., it's a different case. It's the Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos, the Mark Zuckerbergs, these tech billionaires that hold wealth in numbers that don't even make sense. Some of these people are worth more than countries. So, like I said, in both countries, the 1% are going to throw off the stats and make it look insane. That's why I'm concentrating on just the top 10 on both sides. And just to wrap that up, wealth inequality in the US is a lot higher than in Kenya. Meaning, for you to get yourself involved in those classes and be a part of that circulation, you have to climb. You have to climb quite a bit. And when you look at those small populations of those classes, if in the US 70% of the money is being controlled by them, come on now, what does that tell you? The rest of us are fending for 30. Meanwhile, the rest of the Kenyan 50% are can at least fend for more than that, more than the what's it called, 30% that's left over. But overall, the Wealth distribution being higher in the US should open people's eyes as to what it actually takes to fulfill that American dream. Now, we're going to move on to the next topic. I wanted to talk about the class mobility because I think that this is very important to understand. In the first part, I talked about where wealth actually gets, placed. Like I said, in the US, a lot of it is in tangible things. No, in the US, a lot of it is tied to stock market and financial assets that usually fluctuate because of how our economies run. In Kenya, most people tie their wealth to tangible assets like land, agriculture, and then business. In the US, it's usually your home. Then, what was number two for the US? I'm over here forgetting already. Then retirement accounts, which is basically financial assets. Then number three, financial assets. And then number four, finally, business, tangible, right? Your home is also tangible, but like I said, we go through ups and downs in the US. But class mobility is important to understand because it's about what's the realisticness of somebody being able to move from extremely poor to at least stable or somewhere into the next class, to middle class, to lower middle class, right? In the US, let me look at the actual reading here. Class mobility, the ability for individuals or families to move between social or economic classes, tends to be higher in the US than in Kenya, though with important nuances, right? In the US, overall class mobility is moderate but declining in recent decades. If I'm correct, we are actually living in the age of America where there's the least class mobility. So that means that if I'm born poor, out of America's 200 something year old history that it's been a country, I'm living in a day and age right now where I'm most likely to die poor if I was born poor compared to past generations, right? Um, in the US, historically promoted the American dream, but income inequality and structural barriers like education, race, neighborhood segregation limit upward mobility. Um, in Kenya, class mobility more concentrated due to higher poverty rates, limited access to quality education, and healthcare. So, the things that are usually holding people back here in the U.S. would be more systemic things, right? You can't get a loan to buy a home. You can't get a loan to start your business. You can't get qualified or a credit card to sustain your business that's about to fall apart. Meanwhile, in Kenya, a lot of the mobility stems from education, one, where a large chunk of the population won't get to go to college and finish their own college time, right? Their own degrees and all that. But at the same time, corruption and nepotism in public services and a large informal economy also holds those people back. So the way Kenya's set up, it's set up in a way where it needs a good chunk of people to be poor. That way, the rest of these classes can live the same lives that they live. And for me, it's sad to see because it's like when you look at a city like Nairobi, you'll have a place like Kibera, a large population that lives so far below the poverty line, right in a city with so much wealth concentrated in it. I think Nairobi is holds one of the top, wealth concentrations in the continent. So right there in the heart of all that wealth, you have a large population that has to rely on these informal jobs. They have to go clean someone's house. They have to be a maid. They have to, do manual labor, pushing carts in the street. But overall, the class mobility is better here in the US. And that is where the American dream holds its truth. Because at the end of the day, while there's a lot of inequality, while there's a lot of instability in the stock market and stuff, in the housing market, and where most people's wealth lies, at the end of the day, you're more likely to start from zero and move up somewhere here in the U.S. compared to Kenya. all those barriers stopping you in Kenya should not be there. A lot of it is systemic. A lot of it is corruption and political stuff. So to tie this whole video up with a bow, when you look at wealth in both countries, it's easy to look at America and be like, obviously, America is just the better option. And I'm not sitting here trying to tell you it's not the better option. I'm trying to show you the reality of what goes on here and how somebody here can work for 40 years and in a matter of one stock market crash, 20 years of their life is gone. Meanwhile, in Kenya, a lot of people's wealth goes into land. Even me right now, I'm 26, and you see me looking for land in Kenya. There's a running joke that Kenyan men only care about land in 50 by hundreds. Like, it's a running joke online I've seen multiple times where that's all we think about. We think about land 50 by 100, 40 by 50, 40 by 80, all this stuff. Because it's more of a cultural thing of how we view life and all that. We view the tangible, the agriculture, the ability for me to go back to my farm and sustain myself. Meanwhile, in America, a lot of us have to work, jobs that are not anywhere close to the farm. A lot of us don't have any connection to the farm or a family farm, none of that. At the end of the day, here, it's like once you fall off your feet, you end up homeless. And that's why there's a big homeless population here compared to Kenya. Um, Overall, I look at wealth in both countries, and I sometimes also look at just the middle class, and I'm like, a lot of American middle class lives is on borrowed time in the sense of the cars they drive, they don't own. The homes they drive, they don't own. And a lot of even the phones they use, they're paying off monthly. So many things nowadays in America, you can get now and pay later. Basically, you can buy now, pay later. In Kenya, when I look at somebody driving their Pro Box, that Pro Box is most likely owned. They're small Chinese cars they've imported. They've probably most likely bought that car cash from if they had to import it. Now we do have mortgages and different things coming up now. So the concept of like a 20-year mortgage is more common now in Kenya compared to here in the US. So we're going down that same capitalistic route where a lot of people want the item now and they're willing to be tied to debt and all these stipulations for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Do I think it's a good thing? Yes and no. Yes, it gives people the ability to move forward in their life, right? That class mobility, it's now opening up to more Kenyans. Now you don't have to have the full 2 million to buy land and 3 million to build a house. Now you can, what's it called, gather yourself up for a few years, get 1.5, 2 million, and go get a loan from the bank. But at the same time, you're losing that ownership that we used to hold. I used to look at what's it called? Somebody in Kenya driving like a Range Rover, and most likely you could look at them and be like, yeah, they most likely own that car. You look at the artists here in America, the rappers who have $500,000, $1 million cars, they don't own those. But you look at the artists back in Africa, a lot of them buy that stuff cash. Now, overall, that's how wealth looks in Kenya compared to America. It lies in different places, it moves differently, and it's concentrated differently. At the same time, you have a higher chance of class mobility here in the US. Now, is there class mobility in Kenya? Absolutely. But you're going to have to grind 10 times harder. You're going to have some connections. That's another thing. You have to have connections in Kenya to land a job, to get the loan sometimes, or to do certain things, you have to have connections. Overall, I'm going to end that video right there. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, if you have any disagreements, feel free to put them in the comments. I'm always open to someone who tells me, hey, you viewed this incorrectly, this and the other. I'm not the type of person who wants to just talk at you. If you think I portrayed something incorrectly, let me know in the comments. But let me know with detail. Don't just be like, yo, you're an idiot. Overall, that's the end of this video. I love y'all, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.